Welcome back to Sex and Space. I'm Toshi, and today I was very excited to be joined by Dr. David Perl for a conversation all about limerence. David initially pursued a career in medicine, but more recently has expertise in psychotherapy and counselling. He's also set up an online platform called limerence.net, which provides support for people who want to heal from limerence. And I had a discussion with him about what limerence is, who it impacts, what some of the symptoms are, and ways of dealing with it. Let's get into the episode. David, thank you so much for being here with us today. I wondered if we could kick things off by getting you to introduce yourself, who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay, so I'm a 65-year-old man who lives over in London in the UK. I'm currently working as a psychotherapist, coach and relationship. I do couples counselling with my wife, so we work as a couple with couples. So that's what I'm currently working as. I've had various careers over my lifetime. I qualified as a medical doctor originally back in 1984 from University of London, hated it, worked in the NHS for about 7 or 8 years, then segued into the medical aviation industry and did medical repatriations to bring back sick people to the UK. Actually took somebody home from New Zealand once. And traveled the world, and that combined my passions of flying and traveling. I always wanted to be a pilot. That was my real passion, and I had what I call Jewish mother syndrome. You know, my son the pilot doesn't sound like my son the doctor or my son the accountant. So my mum's idea was, well, become a doctor and you'll be so wealthy you can have your own aircraft, but not in the UK, maybe in America. So I did that, and then I did that for a number of years, then set up a crisis management and trauma psychology business, and then in 2010 retrained as a psychotherapist. So that sort of in a nutshell, I've sort of not been one of those traditional people that just trains in one career and stays in that. I've always had, I suppose, restless feet, but I think in hindsight, probably I am neurodiverse, and I'm would have been diagnosed with ADHD, and I get bored of doing a job for a while. So when I get bored, I'll retrain and move on. So that's what I'm doing in my latest iteration.
And so today's podcast, we are here to talk about something called limerence, and that I think could be a new word for some of our listeners. So I wondered if you could unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So back in the first week of when I started training as a psychotherapist, I've been married for 35 years, and I was chatting to this other woman, and just got completely infatuated by her. And now I've had crushes before. I think it's normal for us just to have an attraction to somebody that's passing and is not all consuming. But this, after meeting her a second week and spending no more than 20 minutes of just chatting with her about life and nothing particularly personal, I became completely besotted and obsessed by her, to the point that I was waking up in the morning and I was just fantasizing about her and about our interactions and what I was saying, and trying to read into what she was saying to me, and did she like me? And I was going through, I now called it the perfect storm at that time. I was going through a really difficult time in my life. I was 50, it was midlife. My job, my career wasn't going anywhere, some issues in our marriage, just bored as well, bored of life. And I think it was a sort of a distraction from all that. But I was Googling because I was in therapy at the time, and I said to my therapist, I talked to her about this, and she said, oh, it's just a crush. And I said, no, this is way, way more than a crush. This is like my mind has become hijacked by a virus. I just can't stop thinking about this woman. And after about 3 or 4 months, because I didn't have any word for it at that time. At that time, the word limerence was even less well known than it is now. And I was Googling various stuff, and I came across a forum run by an Australian guy, and with this word limerence. And then I sort of started Googling it and came across the original book written by Dorothy Tennov, who's the psychologist who described it first. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is what I've got. There's a name for this condition. I'm not going mad. Other people have suffered from this before. And so that's how I first came across the word. and got a lot of help from that forum over the first few years, because there are a number of other people that were sharing and supporting each other, because there was nothing else. I couldn't find anything else out there about limerence at the time. Talked about it at my psychotherapy training. They didn't know anything about it. And so that's how I first came across the word. But since then, it is becoming more popular. If you Google limerence now, you get thousands of hits. Back then, when I first got it, there was only maybe half a dozen or a dozen hits on limerence and a couple of academic papers, and that was it.
And so if someone was to, come up to you and say, I'm not quite clear on what it means, how would you sort of in a couple of sentences describe what limerence is?
Yeah, so I think the word that we use is it's involuntary, first off. So it's an involuntary obsession and infatuation over another person. It doesn't have to be the same sex, and we don't have to be not in a relationship. We can be in a long-term relationship. So it's where we get completely obsessed, involuntary, over another person, and we start trying to read into everything that they are saying and reading their body language. We're planning and rehearsing what we're going to say when we meet them. So a lot of sort of rehearsal there. When we do meet them afterwards, we're analyzing and going through every single word over and over again that they said, to see about, did they like me? Do they share the same feelings? Because I think that's a significant part of limerence, is that, am I going mad? Is this completely one-sided? Is this completely unrequited? Or is there some reciprocation that is fueling this what in effect is a fantasy? Because in most cases of limerence, there is no actual or real relationship. It's a fantasy. And so we are fantasizing about a future that we might have, or we would like to have, with this other person, what we call a limerent object. So it's all about objectification of another person. And I think there's a lot of parallels between this and addiction. And we'll maybe unpack this a bit more later on. So it is, I call it an addiction to another person.
And in terms of thinking about where limerence comes from, are there factors that might make someone more likely to experience it, whether it be genetic or, maybe their personal situation? Like what makes someone more, I guess, vulnerable to experiencing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that we don't really know, but I think there's a number of factors that can contribute to it. For sure, I think there's maybe a genetic predisposition. Early life, and I'm still not 100% convinced in my head how much of this is nature or nurture. Is some of it early life trauma? I do think everybody, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I've yet to meet somebody who has limerence who hasn't had early life child abuse, and I would come and define that later on, because it's a controversial, when I did my training, we were told that anything less than unconditional love as a child is child abuse. And when I first heard that, I thought, that's a bit sort of over the top. But with the work I do now as a psychotherapist, I think there's an element of truth in that. So I think there's an element of child, even if it's emotional benign neglect as a child, that's enough to predispose us to perhaps getting limerence. Certainly being neurodiverse, I do think there's a connection between being ADHD, neurodiverse, whatever label we're going to give it. And I'm not a big fan of labels, but I do think there is a correlation between those two things there as well. And then I think circumstance. If we're going through a really difficult time, I just talked about my own perfect storm. Many people, we know about half the people that get limerence have had a significant bereavement or loss before they get limerence. I just lost my father-in-law he just died before I got limerence. So I describe it as it's the ultimate sort of distraction, the perfect distraction from dealing with our own unresolved pain and grief that for many of us is too difficult to deal with or manage or cope with. So I think there's a large distraction displacement going on there as well. And then on top of that as well, you've just got evolutionary drives for us to procreate. The only reason we're here as human beings is to procreate and make more humans. So there's that drive going on as well. And there's nothing, we meet somebody attractive and if we're pushed, Freud said we're pushed away from what we don't like and we're pulled towards what we do like. And if we're in a relationship or unhappy in our current life and we meet somebody that's being pleasant and towards us, we'll be pulled towards that as well. But not everybody gets limerence. I mean, that's the other thing. I think that a number of people, when you talk about it, say, oh, yeah, I can relate to that. But we reckon about 5-10% of people get it at some point in their life. But as I said, there's not a lot of research, so we really don't know.
And so when people are going, do I have just a crush on someone, or do I have limerence? How would you sort of, what advice would you have for them?
I think it's about intensity and how long it's been going on for and how debilitating is it for you. So a crush, as I said before, I've had crushes. They don't stop me getting on with my life. I'm not thinking about that other person apart from when I'm with them, and when I'm with them, I enjoy the engagement and the interaction, but I'm not like a rabbit in the headlight where I'm really hyper vigilant around that other person. With limerence, it's the complete opposite. When I had it, and I've only had it the once, I was like a rabbit in the headlights when I was around this other woman. I was hypervigilant. I was sort of monitoring everything I was saying and doing and behaving to try and make the best impression. So I think it's about just intensity between the two. But, it's like all this stuff in psychology, that it's not black and white. It's a gradation.
And so if someone experiences it once, does that mean that they're likely to experience it again? Or, can they do something to stop it happening a second time?
Yes, there's two questions there. And I've worked with hundreds of people with limerence. I would say that some people only get it once and that's it. Other people are serial limerencers and get it multiple times. I think that Tenov, who described it, said that there's only three ways to resolve it. You either starve it, or you crystallize it, or you there's a third one as well that she talks about.
I have them here: consummation, starvation, and transference.
That's it, transference. That's the other one. Yeah, they're the three things. I think she missed a fourth one, which is we can actually do the deeper psychological work as to. I think it comes down to basically low self-esteem. If at my core, if I feel that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, then I'm looking for other esteem. I'm looking for somebody else to fill that hole in my soul. And when we don't feel great deep down, and some people don't even realize that. They don't even realize that's their core wounded. Like the grandiose narcissist who's overinflated, he or she won't realize that at their core is that wounding. And if we can work on that and learn to self-soothe, to really be more conscious and self-aware of that part of us that is looking for external validation, I think then we can limerence-proof ourselves so that we are better bounded around somebody, that we might fall into that trap again, and we can better manage ourselves. But I think I'm a love addict. That's one of the things that it's just part of me. And I know that given the right circumstances, I could easily fall, not down that rabbit hole of limerence again, but could be drawn into another person where I'm looking for some form of external validation. So, but I'm aware of it and I watch out for it.
And in terms of the people that you've worked with, do you find that in terms of, the ways that limerence gets, either it shifts or it's starved, is there a more common outcome that people go towards, or is it pretty evenly spread?
I would say evenly spread. I mean, a lot of the people that I work with are having affairs, and I do think limerence is a significant part of many affairs. So they either, those go one of two ways generally. They either consummate the affair and leave their current relationship and move on with the new affair partner, and longer term, that rarely works out. We just know statistically that the relationships that start from an affair generally don't do well. So that's one way. Or the other way is that they do decide with time to break off the relationship with a limerent object and starve it out, go no contact, which is not always easy because so many times people end up having affairs with work colleagues or people that live very close to them, and trying to go no contact in those situations is quite difficult. So I do think that, starvation and transference less common. If somebody's not in a relationship and they can transfer, it's very difficult to transfer. Let's say I'm in a long-term relationship. It's really difficult to transfer that back to my original partner then from my limerent object. So you're not going to get limerence again a second time around for the same person.
And in terms of people, maybe if they're experiencing going, can it turn into love? Because I'm sure that's probably a question people are asking. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, it can, although, because I know that because I had limerence in hindsight for my wife, and but it's going to be a bumpy road. I mean, we had, by and large, our marriage was quite good, but we certainly had our issues. And even I remember after 6 months saying to my wife, we need to go and see a psychologist because we were having issues in our relationship. And it took us probably 20 years in the marriage to start finally digging a bit deeper and working on ourselves to resolve our own issues. So I always say to clients that the ideal partner is going to be somebody that's willing to look at themselves psychologically. Are they willing to go into therapy themselves? Are you willing to as well? Because then that's the great crucible for healing. All trauma is relational. So we're all traumatized in relationship by other people, and all healing is relational. So I think that if we can find somebody to do that work alongside, it can be a real gift. So it can, but it's going to take two people willing to look at themselves, get their egos out of the way. And sadly, that doesn't seem to happen all too often. So yes, it can, but it's not, in my experience, not common.
Okay. And I wondered if anyone listening is experiencing limerence and going, I don't know what to do. How should I go about trying to get how to stop this? What are some maybe key piece of advice from all your experience working with this that you'd give them?
Yeah, well, the first stuff I would say, there's so much stuff on the internet now. There's quite a few people doing podcasts on limerence and stuff. Go and check those out because there's some really good information on there. And by and large, I think they all tend to follow the same theme. I think the first piece of advice is, look, if we're going to treat it like any other addiction. You have to abstain. It's like saying to an alcoholic, yeah, you can keep drinking. Don't worry. We'll just work on the other stuff. You've got to go through that withdrawal, and that is no contact. Or, as I said before, if it's a work colleague or some other situation, you've got to learn to be uber boundaried around that person so you minimize any contact with them. And when you do see them, you are very mindful about the interaction, not having any discussion outside anything personal, anything emotional, anything like that. And that leads into the whole question that we'll come to later on about disclosure, because if you've had a friendship with that person, I mean, this is something I see quite often where somebody's been friends with the limerent object for many years sometimes, and there's never been any feelings of that type. There's been fondness and friendship, but nothing romantic. And then suddenly something just shifts, and that person then is suddenly in this turmoil, this vortex of limerence. And then it's really difficult as to, do you say something to them in that situation? But certainly I think no contact is going to be the number one thing that we always advocate. And people, the limerent brain comes up with 101 reasons why that's not going to be possible, and our brains are so good at trying to convince us otherwise, that we just got to have this one more conversation or just do this one thing, and it's all bullshit at the end of the day. Our brains are just bullshitting us. So I think that's the first thing. Secondly, find a therapist if you can, and I know that's a first world problem. It's easy for me to say that sitting in my comfortable home with some disposable income. For many people, limerence doesn't just affect people in the first world. I've had many contacts from people in the developing world who struggle to buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay for a therapist. So I do think that, we can read books on it. We can do self-therapy. We can find a friend who's traveled further down a road of self-development that could be a mentor for us. So there's many other things that we could do that don't involve therapy. But certainly if you can afford it, I would suggest finding a competent therapist that can help you grow and look at, why did you get this and where's it coming from?
And I want to come back to what you mentioned before about disclosure and
Yeah.
what's your perspective on that?
Well, there's this is one of the most overwhelming themes that I see with people with limerence is the desire to disclose, and I think we do that. The justification in our heads that we give us, and I think there's another reason why actually is the justification is that am I going mad? Is this all purely one-sided, or is there some reciprocal feelings? But I think the desire to disclose is more the latter. We want to know, is there reciprocation so that maybe I've got a chance of pursuing this? But I think I disclosed, and and my justification for doing that was we were training to be psychotherapists, and we were encouraged to be completely honest with our feelings. And so here I was overwhelmed by feelings, and I was just being honest and disclosed. In hindsight, it wasn't the best thing to do, and I think that if either the person with limerence is in a long-term committed relationship and the other person is in a long-term committed relationship, it's not appropriate to disclose because you're dumping all your, if they knew the intensity of the obsession that we have, they think that you're stalking them. And I do think there's, something going with stalkers, probably that many do have limerence. But to put that onto another human being is very unfair. Much better that we go and just distance ourselves and work on ourselves. So I think disclosure in that case, never appropriate. Because the other thing that sometimes happens is the other person might not share feelings for you, but you disclose to them and then they know that you have feelings. They sometimes develop in the transference, and I've seen this before, where they start developing feelings for you as well. So it does become reciprocal, which is not good if you've got some other committed relationship that you need to sort out first. The only time I would say disclosing attraction, but not the intensity of attraction, would be if you're both free for a relationship. Then it might be appropriate to say, look, I really like you. Are you interested in developing this as a relationship? But otherwise, no. But all too often, that advice is not heeded. The one thing I've learned with limerence, working with people with limerence, is they don't listen. Everybody, it's like working with anybody with addiction. They think they know better, and they'll sit there and try and convince me, right, they're the one exception to the rule. And I'm wrong, and they're right, and disclosing would be the right thing to do. And my job at the end of the day is just to support them with wherever they're at.
Yeah.
And I can counsel them if they're interested with my own experience, but all too often it's not heeded, and that's just, that's the way it goes.
And obviously it's been something that you've worked with for a long time now. If you were to reflect back, what's one thing that you wish maybe, or a piece of advice you would have given to your younger self, if anything?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. What I say to myself is that I think self-compassion is a really important part of the journey through anything, especially limerence. And what I tell myself is that I made the best decision I could at that time based on the knowledge that I had. Now, easy for me to say, but I wouldn't have disclosed. I wouldn't have gone round to coffee, for instance. I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have joined that group she was in. There's a whole host of things that, with hindsight, I could have done differently that would have had a different outcome. But at the time, I didn't have the capacity, the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience to make any other decision. So I think the thing that I would have said to myself is just be more compassionate to yourself. You're just trying to work your way through something. And yeah, no, as I talk, I come back to this thing, we use with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, where you have thoughts and feelings going on internally and then behaviors. And this is something I work with clients with, to get them, it's okay to have thoughts and feelings internally. It's absolutely fine. We, as human beings, we all have those, and it's absolutely fine to have feelings, to develop feelings for another human being. Doesn't matter. It's what we do with those that is the important thing, the behavioral output. And so many of us don't stop to think about, why am I behaving this way? Why am I wanting to do this? Or why am I not just wanting to do it? The wanting is not the problem. It's actually doing it. So why am I pursuing this person to try and sort of crystallize an affair with that person when it's going to end up messy? And I think that, so self-compassion. And I just want to say the other thing also is, so many of the people I work with are in long-term relationships, and that's why they come to see me, because they've got limerence, and they just are really struggling with, do I go, do I stay? And what I say to them is that, by you crystallizing that relationship and taking it from a thoughts and feelings in your head to actually something that is physical, is just going to create way more mess at the end of the day. It's painful enough as it is just to have feelings for somebody else, but the moment you sort of move into the physical realm, it becomes much messier. And don't think that whether you're married or divorced or leaving that long-term relationship is going to be not without chaos and pain for a whole load of people. We underestimate, certainly if we have a family, if we have children, because with limerence, the other thing it does is it rewrites history. We rewrite history, and we make everything bad about our current relationship to justify in our heads to pursue the new relationship. And so often it's distorted. Our thinking is distorted, and I did this. I mean, I certainly was rewriting history with my wife of 30 odd years to justify leaving her and trying to pursue a relationship. So it's a sort of long-winded way to say, I just think self-compassion is the only thing I would have said to myself. Be kind on yourself, and try not to move from thoughts and feelings to the behavior. Just sit with your feelings and don't act on them.
It's tricky when like you said, it's a fantasy, your brain's kind of conjured this whole scenario. And so I guess, the facts of the situation get a bit distorted, and, then you're influenced to make a decision that's different than one. Looking back, you might make a different decision.
Yeah, and you touch on an interesting point about how we distort the facts, and there's research that shows that, I make this gender specific, men tend to overread interest from a woman. So when a woman's just being friendly towards him, he thinks it's a lot more than just being friendly. She's actually interested in something, and women tend to be the other way round. And they tend to underread and underestimate interest that a man shows in her, and she thinks he's just being friendly when actually he's wanting a lot more than just friendship in that relationship. And so there is some real, I don't know what the term, cognitive bias, I don't know what the term is, but there is some real skewing in how we interpret data. And the facts, well, the facts as to how you see them might be different to how I see them.
That's a very interesting point. It's not something that I was aware of, that different interpretation of the same situation.
I see it all the time here when we're working with couples. The number of times more women who have, and this touches on something that is very controversial about friendships with the opposite sex, where they have, married women have friendships with other men. And it can be problematic because most men, if they're completely honest, are going to be friends with a woman because he wants to sleep with her. That's just the reality. And I don't know. And I've asked women this many times, is it that you don't see the signals, or is it that you like the attention and the validation and affirmation that a man who's interested in you gives you, but you don't want to acknowledge that there's something more going on here? And it may be a bit of both.
It's interesting. I've had those debates with people in my life too. Can men and women be friends? And have you seen those signs? And, like a male friend saying, oh, it's obvious. And a female friend's going, well, I had no idea. So it's a conversation that I've definitely come across before, multiple times, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do find, I think the younger generation, you're a lot younger than me, have a very different perspective on it. When I've done TikToks on it, it gets a lot of controversy. And I
Oh,
think
okay.
the older generation say, yeah, you can't have friendships with the opposite sex. It's not appropriate. It doesn't work. And the younger generation, I think see it very differently. My
Mm,
daughter, who's 30, she sees it very differently. She
mm,
wouldn't see it as a problem. So, I'm mindful of that. Is it just a
mm,
generational thing, a cultural thing as well, but I do look towards a lot of evolutionary psychology as to how we operate in relationship. And I think some of this stuff evolutionary doesn't change that quickly.
mm,
And if you're in a long-term relationship, why would you want to jeopardize that by having friendships with the opposite sex? And I don't know how it works with same-sex relationships, because
mm,
if you're a gay guy or lesbian, then you're going to have lots of friendships with people of the same sex. And if
mm,
you're attracted to them, I'm very actively involved in a men's charity, and we run weekends, and we're very much into diversity. So there are some men there that, we run specific weekends for GBTQ men. And I've had conversations with them about, well, how does it work if you're on a weekend as a gay man and, you see somebody that you're really attracted to, and they have to deal with that because it does happen.
mm.
So, it's fascinating, all this stuff. And look, my view
Yeah,
is better
it
we
is.
talk about it and get it out there in the open and have discussion than just suppress it and push it back into our shadow.
I was just about to say it really highlights to me the importance of communication and having conversations because that's the only way that we can navigate these things, with other people.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you're doing with your podcast. You're going into what would be considered edgy territory, but fantastic that you're opening up conversations around all these areas. That much better we talk about it.
Absolutely, and get more awareness. I think, and it's amazing to be able to connect with so many different people with different perspectives, and I mean, myself, I've learned so much since I've been on this podcast. So yeah, and I hope that our listeners from today as well have learned something about limerence. And if it's something that they've experienced or are experiencing, then this hopefully can guide them in a good direction and give them an idea of how to deal with it. And I just think before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share? Any sort of final thoughts or a question I haven't asked that you would have liked me to have asked?
No, not really. I think that the final thing I would say is limerence is just a symptom, and it's a symptom for, I think, a deeper calling for us to grow, to reclaim the parts that we've split off, to reintegrate those parts that weren't acceptable, we weren't allowed to have, and to use it as a wake up call to go
Mm,
and do that work. I mean, for me, it was the most painful experience I've ever been through, and yet it was the biggest gift that it ever gave me because it really forced me to look at myself and my history and my trauma and to do that deeper work. And, you know, it's a, so I set up a forum called limerence.net where people can go and just get free help there.
mm.
Two people on that forum met. They got married and they have two kids living in Mexico now.
Wow.
So, because of my limerence, setting up
Mm,
that. So you just think, so I just think, wow, what a crazy world we live in. That one experience, and had I not gone through that, well, you and I
mm,
wouldn't be sitting here now, and I
mm.
wouldn't do the work I'm doing now, and hopefully helping other people that are really grappling with something that is starting to be better known, and just to know they're not
Mm.
alone. There is help out there, and we can heal from this. So
I
yeah,
think
that's
too. I was looking through when I was, doing research, and came across your site, and I was looking at your TikTok, and so many people are asking questions and wanting to know more. So it's you've created a really amazing platform and resource for people who are struggling, and I guess who have those questions. So if people want to find you on TikTok or on social media, where should they go looking for you? What's your handle?
So the one I do with my work is themarriedtherapists.com. So they can find our website there. I think at TikTok it's the same. Instagram, I don't do all this stuff. I have somebody who helps me do it. So I'm just way too old for stuff like TikTok. I know it's how the world goes. I think Instagram's probably the same as well. But the married therapist, and then that would be our general therapy thing. If they want to just get specific help on limerence, limerence.net is the website and the online forum where they can get help. But just go into Facebook. There's groups on Facebook for limerence. Do a search. There's other forums, other websites out there as well providing support. As I said, there's a whole load. There's a Dutch lady who does a lot of stuff on limerence as well. There's a lot of help out there to get the knowledge as to what it is and what you might be going through.
And just for our listeners, I'll put all of those social handles in the description so you can find them there too.
Great, thanks.
David, thank you so much for your time and for speaking with me today all about limerence. It's been lovely to speak with you, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us, so thank you.
My pleasure, Toshi, and great to meet you as well.
We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Before we sign off, we wanted to ask you for your help. Because we talk about sex, we keep getting shadow banned across a whole bunch of social media platforms. And that not only makes it hard for people to find us, but it sends a message that sex isn't okay to talk about. Not only is sex okay to talk about, it's totally essential, because more knowledge equals better outcomes for all of us across a whole bunch of different measures. You can make a difference, and what we need from you is your active support. So please follow the podcast and consider checking out our social channels too, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, whatever takes your fancy. You can find us at sexandspace.com and click on our social links from there. Help us make sex an okay space. Thank you for taking the Sex and Space trip with us, and until next time, safe travels, and we'll see you on the next intergalactic episode.